Is that we do appreciate you all coming from great distance to be here today. Those of you who maybe fought a lot of beach traffic coming from the Southern Convocation, the good news for you is that when you return home tonight, you'll be going against the traffic. Those of you from the Northern Convocation, or from perhaps Stevensville, who actually gawked at all that traffic as you drove down here, the good news for you is that there are about 9 really good restaurants in St. Michael's. I'd suggest you stick around. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate the hospitality of Christ Church St. Michael's. When we first came to the diocese, we stayed for a month in a cottage in St. Michael's because of the generosity of a friend of Howard and Susan Snyder's. And the first thing we heard when we got out of our car after that long drive from the deep, deep south was the bells of Christ Church. We felt welcome to the Eastern Shore, so it's nice to be here together. I want to ask us to pray, and I have 2 prayers. One, the prayer book prayer for our church and our diocese, and then one of my favorite prayers for all of us together. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Oh God, by your grace you have called us in the parishes and among the people of this diocese to a goodly fellowship of faith and mission. Bless our bishops and other clergy and all our people. Grant that your word may be truly preached and truly heard, your sacraments faithfully administered and faithfully received, and by your Spirit fashion our lives according to the example of your Son, and grant that we may show the power of your love to all among whom we live, through Jesus Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Gracious Lord, we pray for all conditions of people. Make the old tolerant, the young sympathetic, the great humble, the busy patient. Make wealthy people understanding, strong people gentle, those who are weak prayerful. Make the religious lovable. Make happy folk thoughtful, the clever kindly, the bad good, the good pleasant. And dear Lord, make all of us what we ought to be through the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Amen.
And may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Spirit abide with us in this meeting and forevermore. Amen. I'd like to call upon our deans to call the roll so we know who is here as we gather in this several convocational meeting. First, David Michaud, representing Freedom Malcolm from the Southern District.
St. Paul's, Berlin.
Here.
St. Paul, St. Mark's, Marion Station.
Here.
Church of the Holy Spirit, Ocean City. St. Paul's by the Sea, Ocean City.
Here.
St. Mary the Virgin, Pocomoke City.
Here.
St. Andrew's, Princess Anne.
Here.
St. Philip's, Quantico.
Here.
St. Albans, Salisbury.
Here.
St. Peter's, Salisbury.
Here.
All Hallows, Snow Hill.
Here.
St. Paul's, Spring Hill.
Here.
St. Mary, St. Bartholomew's, Tyaskin.
Here.
Thank you. Now let's ask Henry Sabetti from the Northern Convocation.
St. Augustine's, Chesapeake City. St. Paul's, Kent.
Here.
St. Paul's, Centerville.
Here.
Emmanuel Chestertown.
Here.
Christ Church Denton.
Here.
St. Stephen's Earlville.
Here.
Trinity Elkton.
Here.
Shrewsbury Kennedyville.
Here.
St. Clement's Massey.
Here.
St. Mary Ann's Northeast.
Here.
St. Mark's Perryville. St. Luke's and St. Andrews, Queen Anne's County. Christ Church IU, Wharton.
Here. Thank you, Henry, and Charlie Osberger from the middle convocation in which we are.
Christ Church, Cambridge. Old Trinity Church Creek.
Here.
St. John's, Cornersville. Christ Church, Easton.
Here.
Christ Church, St. Michael's.
Here.
Obviously. Trinity Church, Trinity Cathedral, Easton.
Here.
St. Andrew's, Hurlock. Holy Trinity, Oxford.
Here.
Christ Church, Stevensville.
Here.
St. Paul's, Chap.
Here.
All Faith, Tunis Mills. Here. St. Paul's, Vienna.
Here.
Old Y, and St. Luke's.
Here.
There we are.
Thank you, sir. The purpose of calling the roll is not so much that we can send the results on to St. Peter for his records, but so we'll remember who we are. As lots of congregations with lots of different names, but all together one church in the Diocese of Easton. So welcome to all of you who make up the body of Christ in this part of God's world. Just a couple of words of introduction before we move to our third item of business. Let me just remind you that this meeting, like our pre-convocation meetings in the Advent season before regular convention, is meant to be informational. We're gathered so that you can receive information and have time to digest it, discuss it, talk about it with fellow parishioners, and be prepared to come together in special meeting of the convention on June the 6th, well-informed, well-prepared to debate. So the purpose of this meeting is not to debate things, but to get the information you need. There'll be time for questions and answers, hopefully answers, at least questions. There'll be time for some discussion, but not for debate. Save your ammunition, keep your powder dry, as they say, for June the 6th. But we hope you'll leave tonight fully informed, and if there's anything you need to know that is not shared tonight, please let us know it, and we'll make sure we'll try to get it to you before June the 6th. I have the privilege of reminding us of what you probably know pretty well, since they were sent out to you in various ways. First, the reminder of the convention resolutions we passed in Cambridge, which were sent out to you from the 147th Annual Convention. The discernment resolution number 1 affirmed the values and yearnings that were identified in our discernment process. You should have these in your pack. No, I'll take that back. You probably didn't have these in your packet because they were emailed to you. The first one affirmed the following values and yearnings as discerned by the people and leadership of the diocese. That was an affirmation of the findings of the discernment committee, and we'll have a full report of those as they have evolved from our convention in just a moment. The second basically continued that and asked the discernment committee to evaluate the recommendations and ways that the diocese can address these priorities. And that, again, will be in the report coming from the discernment committee in a moment. Discernment resolution number 3 encouraged the bishop to call for a special meeting of the convention for the purpose of discerning the feasibility of the following 4 options for the future of the Diocese of Easton. I'll say more about those 4 in a moment. And finally, the discernment resolution number 4 asks the standing committee and others to do some work by way of presenting a proposed position description for a new bishop, meeting with our counterparts in Delaware, Maryland, and Southern Virginia, and for the bishop to do a couple of things about identifying other options. Those were the 4 resolutions presented and passed as amended at convention. The way the canons and constitution of the diocese are written, when a special meeting is called, it's given to the bishop to stipulate the sole business of that special meeting. So with the advice and counsel of the standing committee, I drafted 5 resolutions, A through E, which have been sent out to you. And those will be the resolutions at the special meeting. Those resolutions first address the report of the discernment committee, asking the convention to receive and endorse the report, and then ask Dawson Council to implement those priorities. Resolution B asks the bishop provisional, with the advice and counsel of the standing committee, etc., to call for the election of an 11th bishop of Easton, the first priority identified by our convention. Resolution C calls for the convention to request the bishop provisional to call for the election of the 11th bishop of Easton in a part-time capacity, serving concurrently as rector of a parish. Resolution D calls for the convention to seek to unite in common mission and ministry with a neighboring contiguous diocese of the Episcopal Church, with the provision that there be a bishop suffragan residing within the present geographical boundaries of this diocese, who shall continue to be titled Bishop of Easton. And the last resolution, E, says the convention appoint a committee to undertake a further study of non-traditional missionary models of the episcopate which have been adopted by other smaller dioceses, and report their findings to the annual convention in 2016. Those are the 5 resolutions that will be before us when we gather on June the 6th, and they will constitute the sole business of the meeting. I remind you that they can be substituted, amended, defeated, passed, otherwise dealt with according to Robert's Rules of Order. So those resolutions will be put on the floor and we'll debate them in order, or however the convention decides they wish to discuss them. The purpose of our meeting tonight is to follow up on what was mandated for the Bishop, the Standing Committee, and others. And we'll begin with a report by our Discernment Committee. I believe David Michaud is giving that report, or Joe, are you giving it? Huntley and Brinkley, come forward.
David, are you going to put stuff on the screen? You want me to get that? Or do you want you?
Good afternoon. Everybody should have a copy of the report of the Discernment Committee of the Diocese of Easton in response to Discernment Resolution number 2. I'm going to just show some slides which basically go through the report. The committee has come up with 10 recommendations for what to do with the priorities. I will go through them, and then I'll turn it over to Joe, who will have some last words from the committee about where we go from here on this. So let's move forward. The charge the Discernment Committee had given to it was, what is the best way for the church to proclaim the gospel of Christ, to celebrate the people's ministries, and to grow the church on the Eastern Shore of Maryland? The answer should reflect on our values and yearnings. To remind ourselves of that, we asserted at our convention in February that we value our faith in God, Holy Scriptures, following the commandments of our Lord Jesus Christ, tradition, our Anglican heritage, liturgy, history, and sense of place, mission outreach to those in need, being open, inclusive, and welcoming, and coming together. We also affirm that we yearn for leadership and vision, more effective communication, knowing how to be evangelists and being successful at evangelism, working together, and reaching the next generation. Since we began this process in the summer and into the fall, we have discerned who we are, we have discerned who we want to become, and so the question before us is, how do we get there? Through Friday afternoon at our last convention, we identified 38 priorities. And after the convention, the Discernment Committee reviewed the priorities, and we decided to group them into categories. And we ended up with 4 categories. The first is unification, collaboration, and these are on page 5 if you want to look through that too, if that's hard to read all of that. So all of these priorities identified at convention were put under the title of unification, collaboration. We then had a second area which we called Christian formation and spiritual growth, and we had a number of our priorities that fit under that. We had then a third category called evangelism and outreach, and there we had another group of priorities grouped under there. And then we had our fourth area called marketing, which tended to be a bit more specialized, but we felt since there were a number of them specific in that it deserved its own area. And then finally we had a category we called heritage, history, culture, and sense of place, where we had the tradition, remaining who we are, honoring our history in that. So once we got those categories, and the question is, how are we going to move forward with enacting these priorities? Remind you about Discernment Resolution number 2, which is our charge for this report. In answering the question, what is the best way for the church to proclaim the gospel of Christ, to celebrate the people's ministry, and to grow the church on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, hereby task the Discernment Committee to evaluate and present recommendations of ways the diocese can address the priorities identified by this convention during its time of discernment and listed in the priorities that we identified at the convention that are in harmony with the diocesan values and yearnings, and present these recommendations for consideration at the special convention. So our report is a result of following up on this resolution. What we did is we asked ourselves a few questions. How does the diocese address these priorities? We also asked ourselves, what other information do we need in order to figure, make recommendations, and then who will follow through with the recommendations? So these were questions that we looked at, we broke into small groups, and we came back together, and the results are a number of 10 recommendations. The first is kind of really undergirds a lot of the other recommendations that we have. We were looking at the passage from John. Jesus said, "I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit." And we found that in this branch of Christ's one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, the Diocese of Easton, it is through our parish life that we bear much fruit for our Lord. And just as the fruit of the vine, the grape grows best in healthy clusters nourished by a strong branch, so too our mission as a diocese is fruitful when parishes can share and collaborate with one another through geographical clusters held together by a nurturing diocesan structure. So our first recommendation is to establish clusters of neighboring parishes in the Diocese of Easton and charge them to organize and collectively find areas of cooperation, sharing, and collaboration to further the mission of the church in their geographical area. And we actually started naming names, or naming clusters. And these pretty much follow the north, middle, and southern convocations, but not quite, because we looked at geography and closeness a bit more than just politics. So first we have the Cecil cluster, and you can see all of these beginning on page 7 of your report. We have the Kent cluster, We have the Queen Anne's and Caroline cluster up in the north. Then we have in the middle, central, the Talbot cluster of 6 churches and the Dorchester cluster of 5 churches. In the south, we have the Wicomico cluster of 5 churches, the southern cluster, 4 churches, and the Ocean cluster of 3 churches. We believe that there are enough commonalities and also of like interest in these communities that it makes sense to have these congregations talking and interacting and collaborating with one another. So that's recommendation number 1. Going along with it, we get 3 recommendations dealing with collaboration. The second one is to have a structure at the diocesan level that will encourage these grassroots collaborations, that will foster them. But rather than coming up with a new task force or committee or so, we looked at the existing structure and existing canons. There is already a Department of Missions that is tasked with doing a lot of this work. So the idea here is to reorganize the Department of Missions to oversee, encourage, and provide assistance for carrying out the mission of the diocese through the sharing of resources and increased collaboration among parishes, building on the strengths of our congregation and addressing areas of weakness and culture. I mean, look, the charge in the canons for the Department of Missions is to deal with all matters concerning the unification, development, and prosecution of missionary work in church extension in the diocese, and to equip baptized persons for the ministry of evangelism. So we already have something set up. The other thing that's interesting is, according to the canons, the person that heads up the Department of Missions is the bishop. And we were talking a lot about the fact that if we're going to get any change, any movement, we are going to need leadership from the bishop. And so this situation sets up, I think, a good way to encourage these kind of collaborations, to feed into the clusters. The thing about it, though, is rather than being top-down, the clusters can all come together differently, depending on what is important, what is working for you. So it's not like it's a whole top-down kind of thing. Grassroots develop their relationships, and it is the Department of Missions that encourages that and provides resources for that, and helps organize that, and helps them to tell their stories to other clusters. So that's recommendation number 2. The third recommendation is, well, what do we talk about? And so the Department of Missions, we recommend that the Department of Missions and clusters shall identify sharing and collaboration opportunities addressing these areas: worship, buildings, clergy and staff, youth ministry, outreach and mission, evangelism, fundraising, stewardship, Christian formation, and cooperative services you might engage in together, like payroll or publications, maintenance, things of that sort. So we're saying, well, let's organize this, and then let's sit down and have conversations in these different areas. So that's the third recommendation that we have. Then we went to the next area, which is evangelism and outreach. Very much a priority in this diocese. Holy Scriptures contain very brief references to Jesus in the temple, and a plethora of verses about Jesus' actions in the world: feeding, healing, teaching, and ministering to the needy and disenfranchised. Through Jesus, who's both our role model and our motivation, we are called to action, and this action is evangelism and outreach. We have really four recommendations in the area of evangelism and outreach. Recommendation number 4, institute the AWE, the Average Weekly Evangelism Report. You know, we are held accountable for how we are doing as parishes by the ASA, the Average Sunday Attendance. That's what happens in our churches on Sunday mornings. What about what happens in our churches the rest of the week? All the outreach efforts we're doing, all the evangelism, all the Christian formation, all of that. None of that is being captured. We would like to see the establishment of metrics that would be able to measure and show the wonderful things that we are doing besides just Sunday attendance at worship. So that's recommendation number 4. Recommendation number 5 is to conduct a diocesan-wide evangelism audit to see what we are already doing and how we can do it even better. Let's get a questionnaire together to see what things are we doing that are evangelistic. And maybe it'll bring up some things that we're not doing. Maybe we're doing some great mission outreach, but we're not telling people about it. And so these might bring up some things like, oh, you know, I could be doing evangelism here, here, and here. The idea would be establish a survey that would be taken by every parish and as an aid to encouraging and reward and celebrating evangelism. Recommendation number 6 is to organize evangelism efforts at the cluster level, being able to help provide training, sharing of resources, and developing action plans from the diocese and doing it at the
For subparagraph number 1, to determine the resource funding challenges the diocese faces in attracting and supporting a full-time episcopate. Deborah?
Just click the mouse. Hi, everyone. This was a tremendous amount of work, and we had a fantastic committee. I am going to just do a little background. Basically what Howard said. It was formed in response to Resolution 3 from February. And here are our people in the committee. It was the Reverend Dr. Darcy Williams, who's VP of Council and the Associate Director at Emmanuel. Of course, me, Chair of the Finance Department from St. Clements Massey. Laura McCarthy, who is the Secretary of Diocesan Council from St. Peter's. We have Tom Mendenhall, home parish here, member, and he's on both the Diocesan Council and the Finance Department. People call it the main department. In Christ Church, St. Michael's. And Kirk Wade, who's a member of Diocesan Council, and he's from Shrewsbury. And we have our ex officio member, the chair of the standing committee, Howard Snyder, who so graciously introduced me. As Howard said, we called it Option 1, discerning the feasibility of Option 1 for the future of the Diocese of Easton, and that was the election of the 11th Bishop of Easton and a full-time episcopate.
Hey, Deborah, would you pull your speak back? Hold it up so we can back.
Okay, that's better, huh? Most people usually say I'm loud, but that's fine. I'll talk like this. Election of the 11th Bishop of Easton and a full-time episcopate. So that's where we started, looking at the budget and the staff impacts. Now, in your packet, you have 4 scenarios to review. We call them, these scenarios have already been reviewed or vetted at one time or another by the members of the Discernment Committee, the members of the Standing Committee, the Finance Department, and also our Bishop. And Council will see it on Tuesday night. We just, between the time constraints, that was the earliest that we could get to them. Now, the 4 scenarios. The first scenario in your packet, which I believe is page, let's see. It's not numbered, but it's not numbered, but it's after 16. It's separate. It's separate. Oh, you have it separate? Okay. Yes, that's it. Thank you, Connie. There's 4 scenarios. We have 2 high points and 2 low points. At the high point, which was a full-time bishop and full-time canon, why we call it high point is because we took the median of a survey that was done of the bishops. You have it in a footnote. Bishop's compensation based on the Bishop's Compensation Report 2013 from the Church Pension Fund, and then we adjusted it since it was 2013 for 3 years of inflation because we were tasked to look at 2016. So we used 1.7%. That was the inflationary factor we used last year. You have it on one sheet. I couldn't get it on one sheet, but that's option 1 at the median. Option 2 is for full-time bishop and part-time canon at the median. Low point 1 was full-time bishop and full-time canon, and this was at the low of all the dioceses in the nation, the low point. And full-time bishop and part-time canon. So that's how we looked at it. And this is the sheet that you have in front of you. Unfortunately, I like to remember it. I'm sorry. It's thinking. It's thinking. It'll be up in a second. There we go. Thank you. I'll stay away from that. Stay away from that cord. Okay. On page 1, we did a budget which is included in a packet which you haven't already picked up. You'll pick up before you leave this evening. We did a budget for 2016 based on operating income of $809,731. Operating expenses based, and the only differences were for staff. And then we have that net supplemental part, which on your detail will show you that that's basically retired clergy premium and some accrual, which is, as you recall, putting some money away for a rainy day. Now, you can see the loss for each one, okay? Now, let's go to 2. This is what you have on your 1, and I put this is how we came up with the staff numbers, bishop compensation from the survey, along with the benefits, because as it was pointed out, when you hire a priest, it's not just the salary, it's also the benefits. And we're looking at pension and medical there. And then the canon that we have underneath. On page 2, you have the 4 scenarios. And what we used in our putting together these numbers, we looked at a conservative approach, which was what was pledged in 2015. 2015, our magic number was $675,424. And then we said, okay, so what do we have to do to break even with this budget? What do we have to do in order to come out to a no loss, no income? And you see that the apportionment, because that's basically where it's going to have to come from, for all 4 scenarios, are given in the middle bold line. And the funding deficit is in red. So for the high point 1, we're short by $118,000, roughly $500. High point 2, which is with the part-time canon, $67,000, roughly $500. The low point, full-time for both, $92,000, and then the full-time, part-time bishop at the low point, a shortfall of $44,000. If you'll turn to your last page that you received, then we looked at, okay, so you're telling us what the budget deficit is. What are some of the things that we could do? Well, interestingly enough, if you look at alternative 1, that's if everyone pays 100% of their apportionment in 2015 numbers. Look how much we're in the black. In the full-time bishop, full-time canon, we would be in the black by $28,000. At the full-time bishop, part-time canon, that's at the median level now, that's $79,000. At the low point, the numbers reflect 55,000, and then if we did the part-time canon in the low point, $103,000. So that's just leaving everything as it is now, but everyone paying 100%. Then we said, okay, so if we fool around a little bit with the apportionment schedule, progressive schedule that we have, and we went to a flat rate, what would that look like? Give you folks something to think about there. Alternative two, if we wanted a break-even situation, in other words, we want to cover that budget deficit of $118,000, then everyone would pay a flat 12.2%. And so on, 11.35, 11.65, and around 11% for the lowest. Now, alternative three, that's doing some supposition. That's saying we, in the past, we've had parishes that did not give 100% of their giving. So how high would we have to raise our apportionment and assume that those parishes would keep the same percentage of giving, not 100% but less? And you see, wow, it really jumps. 14.75, roughly 14%, 13 to 14, 15%. So that was a culmination of about 2 or 3 months of work and several meetings. So thank you for your time, and hopefully you'll pick up your packet in the back, which gives you much more detail. And I presume that we're holding questions until the end, correct? Howard?
Yes.
Yeah.
We're now at item 3D on your agenda. We're now at item 3D on your agenda. One of the next things that the Standing Committee was asked to look at is a proposed position description for a full-time bishop. And I'm at this point going to call on the Reverend Charlie Osberger to take you through this. You should have a copy in your packet. It has the shield of the diocese at the top. Charlie, thank you.
Does everyone have the page with the diocesan shield in color? It begins in italic, the paragraph, the ministry of a bishop. So what you see before you is the very earliest efforts at describing a position description for the 11th Bishop of Easton, a person who would be serving the full-time capacity as the 11th bishop. The words that have been selected here are a genuine effort to link together documents which describe the ministry of a bishop, essentially a quotation from the Catechism, what is the ministry of a bishop? A sincere effort to link language to this description that is reflected in the Discernment Committee's report. We took upon ourselves, that is, a subcommittee of the Standing Committee, the Reverend Bill Ort, the Reverend Mark Nesselhut, Howard Snyder, chair of our Standing Committee, and yours truly, to consult diocesan websites for bishops who have been recently elected, or persons elected bishop. And some of the phrasing here is reflective of these efforts to describe as well desired candidates for the office of bishop. And then a statement which is almost as you would a preamble to a more fuller, complete position description, which is clearly in the future. At most likely the responsibility of a future nominating committee or search committee to be appointed by the standing committee, but so is the will of this upcoming special convention to move in that direction. So we think it is a worthy effort in the beginning, but there's lots more to be deeper reflection, a clear perception about what the responsibilities of the bishop mean, and in many ways how the words of ideals and ministry and mission and our values relate to the actual, as we might say, hopeful, desired responsibilities of a bishop. So that's really what I'm presenting to you. And if there are questions at some other point, we'll have that later in the meeting. And my thanks to Bill and to Mark, to Howard. You can't thank yourself, but there it is. I mean, so, thank you very much for the public.
The next item on our agenda is yet another request that was made by the delegates at the February convention, and that was to identify a timeline should we elect to go in the direction of a search and election of our next diocesan bishop. Some of the constraints that we have, Bishop Henry will only be with us until mid-July of 2016. So one of the most logical timeframes for a timeline would be if the decision of the convention is to go forward and elect a new bishop, would be from June 2015 to June 2016 and allow for some sort of transition period after that. That is subject to change depending on the appointment of a search and nomination committee. But we can't get ahead of ourselves there until we've had our special convention in June and we decide which path we're going to take. What are the funds that are needed to conduct such a search and nomination? We've already set aside in the 2015 budget $45,000 for that purpose, and I believe that we would continue to do the same in 2016 so that we would have at our disposal around $90,000 to conduct that process. What are our resource funding challenges? Deborah has laid those out in pretty clear relief for us. And those are some things that you all should be speaking about when you go back to your parishes. We all need to be thinking about how we can be responsible if it is our collective decision to elect an 11th bishop of this diocese. We have to be responsible in how we are good stewards to fund that process and to fund the maintenance of that episcopate. The next thing I want to report about is the visits that you asked us to make to 3 contiguous dioceses in our area. Your bishop appointed the following group to make those visits at your request, and Those people consisted of the Standing Committee, Charlie Osberger, Susan Harwood, Bill Ort, Libby Rice, Mark Nesselhut, and myself, together with the Vice President of Diocesan Council, Darcy Williams, and the co-chair of the Discernment Committee for the Diocese, Joe Merrill. Our charge was to ascertain the possibility of unification with these other contiguous dioceses and to identify the issues that would be involved in that process. These 3 trips were each different, to say the least. But there were some commonalities, and I want to share with you what some of those commonalities were. First of all, I want to say that our visits to these dioceses occurred on April 21st to Delaware, April 23rd to the Diocese of Maryland, and May the 7th to Southern Virginia. That was a little bit of an interesting thing because my stepdaughter was being married that weekend right after that. So I had to negotiate with my wife. What were some of the commonalities that we discovered in our visits? One of the big discoveries was that there are many small parishes in all 3 of these dioceses who are dealing with the issues of sustainability and stability. We are not alone in this process. Everyone around us in those 3 dioceses are sharing the same issues. Portions of these dioceses are very far apart from each other, as are portions of our diocese. If you think about Northeast and Pocomoke, for example, that's a pretty fair distance. The distance, I believe, should not stop us from looking very hard at the possibility of collaboration and perhaps unification in the future. I think that the national church, which I guess is the wrong name, excuse me, it's, what is it, David? The
Church-wide.
Church-wide church, through a report called the Trek Report, Reimagining the Episcopal Church, is urging this kind of discovery, this kind of collaboration, et cetera, et cetera. And by doing what we're doing, by having these visits, by going through this discernment process, I truly believe that we are at the forefront of some of that activity that the national church is encouraging. Yes, there are similarities, there are commonalities, but there are differences as well. Size of budgets in these various dioceses, a number of parishes, number of people on the rolls. For example, Maryland and Southern Virginia have over 100 parishes each, 107 to be exact, much larger than we are. And they respectively, Maryland and Southern Virginia, have about 44,000 and 30,000 people on their rolls. Whereas Delaware and our diocese have approximately 38 parishes, whereas Delaware is slightly larger in members that are on the rolls at about 11,000, and we are at about 8,300. And the budgets range everywhere from 9 million to our budget of 855,000. So there are significant differences as well. The one thing that all 3 dioceses had in common from our perspective was that they were all very interested in the fact that we were coming to them and saying, this is one of the options we're considering, a possible collaboration / ultimate unification, etc. And each one of them expressed a meaningful level of interest in continuing a dialogue with them about these issues. I can also say that each of these 3 dioceses are not interested in a whirlwind courtship or early marriage. They were very clear about that. To use a courting and marriage analogy, they're much more interested at this point in time in dating, becoming friends, more dating, understanding each other better, and then ultimately deciding where we go from there. And this type of process is a process that will take a long period of time. It is true that with the Diocese of Maryland, because we would be reunifying with them, could take a shorter period of time because we don't need General Convention's approval to do that, whereas the other 2 we would, which would take a longer period of time, maybe 3 to 6 years in that neighborhood. It's two conventions, 2 national conventions. Am I correct about that, Mark? Charlie? 2 conventions, 2 national conventions. And since they only meet every 3 years, well, it could be 9 years, I guess. Charlie, I mean...
You wouldn't count the one this year.
Right.
So it'll be 3 and then 6 from there.
Yeah, okay. One of the themes that we heard from a number of these dioceses was the fact that there's a lot of work to be done. I feel encouraged by the whole process, and I hope that you will be too as we go forth and discover whether this is a path that we want to take. Thank you. Bishop Parson.
To finish our reports, I was asked to do a couple of things, and you've got a document in your packets that looks like this. Report from Bishop Parsley. I'll be speaking to this. I was asked to find out information from anybody I could about other non-traditional / missionary models of the episcopate currently being used in the experience of the Episcopal Church. I asked the Reverend Marianne L., who had raised this matter on the floor of our convention in February, to work with me on this, and she agreed to write a white paper, which you will find attached to my report, in which she outlines essentially, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that she knows about in her experience. The first is a bishop of another diocese working as bishop of an additional diocese. She gives the example of the Bishop of North Dakota serving a quarter time as Bishop of Louisiana after the retirement of the Bishop of Louisiana. That worked for 12 to 18 months. a portion of the salary was paid by Louisiana. That meant that the bishop flew down to New Orleans from wherever he lived in North Dakota to get warm. It's a pretty good arrangement between the hottest and the coldest states in the country. And it worked out for a while. I'm told the bishop got a little weary of the traveling, but it worked for 12 to 18 months. That happened after Katrina and the retirement of the Bishop of Louisiana, so it was sort of an interim measure. B, bishop working part-time as a rector. This essentially is one of our options we talked about, which is the bishop having a dual role. That has been done recently in the Diocese of Western Kansas. The bishop was elected in the diocese, being rector of a parish, and continued in that role, half-time as rector, half-time as bishop. I spoke to him on the telephone, and after 3 years, he rotated out of the rector role into a more full-time bishop role, because he said it was difficult to maintain focus on the diocesan role with all to do as rector of a parish. Also in North Dakota and South Dakota, those similar models were tried, and I talked to the bishop of one of the Dakotas. I confess I'm not sure which it was. I think it was South Dakota. Actually, I'm wrong. It was another diocese. It was Northwest Michigan. And he started out having 3 small congregations, and as of next year, he's going to continue working with 1 congregation, but not the other 2. So clearly, that seems to be a little hard to sustain. 3, C, having a bishop provisional for an extended period of time. The Diocese of Eastern Oregon had a bishop provisional since 2009. I don't know how long that lasted. It may still be in place, in fact. It is, David says.
There's a search committee.
So that's 15 or 16 years, 5 or 6 years, but there is a search committee moving forward, is that right, at this point? In the case of our own neighbors in Pennsylvania, the Bishop of Northwestern PA is assisting currently with the Bishop of Bethlehem, serving as bishop for Bethlehem in addition to being diocesan bishop of Northwestern Pennsylvania. That apparently is working pretty well. It's a little closer together than Louisiana and North Dakota. And D, joining with another diocese and having a bishop suffragan for an area. That one is one of our options also. That's very traditional in the Church of England, where dioceses often have 3 areas in which there is a bishop suffragan for each area, who is the bishop of that area, but who is actually assistant to the bishop of the diocese. A good example is the Bishop of London has 3 suffragan bishops, the Bishop of Suffolk, the Bishop of Woolwich, and the Bishop of some other part of London. I can't remember the name of the third one.
Kensington.
It's not Kensington. I thought it
They might
was.
have changed it, because I know the retired bishop of Kensington.
It's like got a C. It starts with a C.
Could be,
But
maybe they changed it.
Whatever. I've met him, and they all work somewhat independently of the diocesan bishop, but ultimately it's one diocese with 3 areas. That has not been done in the Episcopal Church in this country, but I think is a viable model, which could indeed be an interesting, innovative model for the future. You see that the pros would be that perhaps the diocese will be stronger financially and otherwise. There'll be some savings with staff consolidations, perhaps more collaboration between congregations. The cons lose the feel of a small diocese with a lot more individual attention, and might feel that a diocese like Easton's might get swallowed up by a larger place. And then last, E, which is really a subset of B, which is a part-time bishop with supporting staff like canon missioners to divide up the ministry, some of whom might be rectors of parishes, but who would have a certain percentage of their time dedicated to certain areas of ministry. A little bit like what Abigail Nesselhut is doing currently, for us in terms of deployment, transition, and ministry support while she's vicar of Tunis Mills. Vicar, am I right, Abigail? Rector? Rector. Sorry, rector. That's right, we did make that change, didn't we? So, those are all some of the configurations that are being worked on in the larger church over the past few years. You'll notice the last page, just a couple of closing remarks. There need to be conversations about finances. Yes, that's part of it. But what are the needs of the diocese? What kind of leader does the diocese need at this time? How do we make this decision, with the decision being mission-focused rather than one that just keeps things status quo? And remembering the time that a bishop has to be out of the diocese working for and with the larger church, as well as House of Bishops meetings, needs to be considered. That is as comprehensive a look at different models that we were able to come up with. In my comments about that, I did say at the end of part one, these different models, these are bishops of smaller dioceses like Easton, talking about the bishops who have also had parish responsibilities. Both of the colleagues I talked to have evolved into more full-time diocesan ministry and less or no parochial ministry. This would be an innovative and effective model, but experience suggests that it would require intentional changes in the role of bishop and expectations for how the bishop spends his or her time. In other words, some of these models could work, could be very innovative, but they'd have to be a corporate shift in some of our expectations of what the bishop does and doesn't do to make them work. The second and last thing I was asked to study was to investigate parishes in the Diocese of Easton which might be willing and able to have the next bishop serve concurrently as their rector. Following comments. Historically, a combined bishop-rector ministry has been employed twice in the Diocese of Easton. Bishop McClellan served as rector of Old Trinity Church Creek over a 10-year period. Dan Dunlap's not here, is he? No. I tried to reach Dan to find out if that included the whole tenure or part of the tenure of Bishop McClellan. I could not get an answer. Bishop Davenport served part of his tenure as bishop, also as rector of St. Peter's, Salisbury, for I think 3 years of his tenure, the rest of it just as bishop. I'm not sure why that happened, but the Depression may have had something to do with it. Money, that's what I thought. He served as bishop 1920 to 38, but as rector of St. Peter's 33 to 35. So it's kind of an interim gap, I guess, to get past some financial humps. Now, to identify a parish who might be willing to do this is actually a pretty complex thing to do. As I thought through it, I concluded it's not appropriate for me to actually approach a specific parish or two or three, but until we're clear about our future direction. I know of two parishes whose future circumstances and location might, in italics, might lend themselves to a combined bishop-rector ministry, but I have no idea if they'd be willing to consider it. There may be others. If we did decide to go in that direction, I think it would take a very careful group of people to discuss that confidentially with a few churches, because it does present a whole different group of complexities in terms of how we would make that arrangement. So I'm sorry I can't tell you who, what, and where. Finally, a couple of comments. My research of the previous question, number one, with Marion L., suggests that this arrangement may be possible in the short term, but it's likely not to be sustainable in the long term. Should we wish to pursue this model, the diocese and parish should expect that the bishop-rector would serve approximately 55 to 60% time as bishop and 40 to 45% time as rector. he or she could perhaps visit parishes in the diocese on a 2-year rotation rather than 1 year, having several area confirmation services annually. This would mean approximately 25 Sundays in the parish and 20 in visitations to other churches. That is taking 52 minus vacation and bishops' meetings and other things. A curate or part of a canon's ministry perhaps would likely be needed to help the parish. A deacon could be of great help as well. The arrangement would need to be agile and carefully evaluated to be sure that a satisfactory balance is found and maintained. My view would be Trinity Cathedral would continue to be as is, with some of the space currently used for the diocesan staff available for the cathedral. My main worry personally would be the loss of availability and flexibility in both roles, and the bishop rector being spread too thinly. If we decided to go in an innovative direction, clearly we'd need to do a little bit more homework in actually nailing down the specifics of that and searching for, in the case of a rector-bishop role, a parish where that could work and where the people would be delighted to have that sort of arrangement. I see a few smiles out there. Some of you are smiling, thinking how delightful that would be, right? Okay, so that pretty much concludes the information we have to share from what we've done since the end of February. I'm going to ask Howard to come up here since he's been hands-on with a lot of this with me. And we're game to entertain your questions about any of this. And I thought maybe just for the sake of order, we might first see if there are any questions about the Discernment Committee's report, remembering that we've got 5 resolutions, A through E, that I went over at the beginning, that we're going to be addressing. The first one deals with the Discernment Committee report and any amendments or changes we might want to make in that. Nancy, do you have a word?
I just have a comment that I'd like to make. So looking at the figures that are presented by Deb Pagone, calling the 11th Bishop of Easton is well within the means of this diocese. It is troubling to me and frustrating to realize that this is not the case because 12 parishes are not paying their asking. It is my personal opinion that the askings are fair, based on the formula with which we are all familiar, and certainly the budgeting process is transparent. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Jumps right to the... Why don't we just stay with that for a minute, because that's going to be a topic, I'm sure, of conversation. Next.
This is a little different, but it does talk about the discernment.
Could you stand so we can hear you better? I'm sorry to ask you to do that, but...
You have changed the resolutions from numbers to letters, is that correct? So resolution number 1 is now resolution A?
Yeah, actually, the ones we adopted in February are numbered.
Yes.
And the ones for the special meeting are lettered.
Okay.
That's the reason.
Just
Yeah. So A is number 1.
Okay, great, thanks.
Kevin Cross, just staying with Nancy's comment, did the Discernment Committee take a look at the third of our parishes that don't pay their apportionment to determine how many really can and how many simply choose not to and decide to devote money elsewhere, and how that issue could be resolved in the future? Because it seems like it's a major stumbling block. We're 43,000 to 118,000 short. Unless somehow we can increase the funding. So I'm wondering if the Discernment Committee spent any time trying to understand the reasons why parishes are unable or unwilling to meet their assessment.
I'm going to ask Howard to say something, but I'll say just initially, churches are in very different places. You can't say there's one answer to that that applies to everyone. Churches are in different seasons of ministry, ups, downs, you know. And so some of that is because of the changing seasons in a parish's life. There may be other reasons. I'll let Howard see what he might say.
Yeah, but I wasn't looking for that overall. I was looking, you know, as there been outreach to those parishes to figure out what the issue is and what they might not.
You want to
That's what I mean.
Well, There are mechanisms for the diocese to reach out to those parishes. There's a Canon 606 called a listening committee, and that is part of what can be utilized to speak to those parishes, to see what can be done in that regard. And if that's where we need to go, then that's where we will go.
Yeah, well, that's my question, because it's hard to figure out what option to go with when we don't know what is really possible dollar-wise. And I think that's an option that needs to be exercised, and obviously short time now between now and the special convention, but we need to have a realistic picture of what we can do. And I'm not sure that we have it yet.
Well, there has been some discussion about putting on the floor an amendment to Resolution B that's being proposed, which would put some teeth into the financing of that decision to elect an 11th diocesan bishop. That'll be subject to discussion at the special convention. But there has been some discussion about that, and some language has been prepared, which will probably be presented at that time. Michael, you wanted to ask a question?
I was just going to say that I believe that the same convention that we passed, the canon that dealt with parishes not paying the full apportionment being made mission when the rector leaves, the same convention we passed something about having a listening committee, and I don't think that that had been appointed. Is that correct?
There is no such committee at this point.
But am I correct that the same convention that we passed, the one thing we also passed the listening committee?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that I was correct in that. Because I wouldn't mind being listened to.
Let me get my date book and you get your date book.
Not me personally, I mean my parents.
Eddie?
Eddie Vance, Christ Church, Denton. This is not a new topic for our diocese, by anybody's definition. So I'd like to put somebody on the spot. I wonder if Ron Giese can tell us some of the things he's heard over the years about some of the reasons why parish. You don't have to, Ron. It's just a thought. So you must have heard something from somebody about why. Forget I mentioned it.
I thought you were my friend.
This year, we were asked if we did not pay the full apportionment to write a letter to the bishop explaining why it was that we didn't, which we did. And I just, as a parish that does not pay the full apportionment, I would be glad to have a conversation with someone who could come in and perhaps look at things and help us to understand a better way that we could get to that. But it means different things in the parish, and I'm not going to get into details, but I just think that might be a helpful thing to have. That's all I'm saying.
I would agree with that.
That request for a letter of explanation has been in the canons for some time. I decided to enforce it by following up with those who didn't send a letter. And I asked Art Kendall to be the one to contact churches. You did respond. Thank you very much. I remember your response. Some of the others didn't after a couple of nudgings. And so I decided at that point I would let it go unless we moved to the listening committee approach, which we haven't done, partly because it's new, it's never been done or organized, and it's going to be something that's going to be challenging to do right. Not create tension and complexities that could be worse than the status quo. So we have to be careful how we do that. There's been a lot going on. But that may be what we need to do.
Certainly confidentiality.
Yeah. I will say one more thing, and then Tom's next. In having been rector of a number of parishes, I know that the conversation that goes on between local needs versus diocesan needs, and that conversation I'm sure is familiar to many of you on vestries and rectors and so forth. Changing seasons and circumstances in parishes are the issue. I know that in one of the explanations, somebody made a great point that the only way they can balance their budget at the local level is to use their endowment funds. They didn't think it was good stewardship to spend principal to make up their diocesan apportionment when they're already spending some to make the local parish budget work. Well, I mean, I would say that that's a stewardship issue for that parish, needing to really work on stewardship in a very intentional and bold way and help the people be more generous, you know. So there are ways to respond that are creative and helpful and positive, and I wish we had a mechanism in the diocese where we could do some of that better. Yeah. Tom.
Would it be helpful, given that different parishes who don't make or asking have different reasons, to at least reflect in terms of the merger options, what the three dioceses that were contacted, what percentage of asking they have compared to our percentage?
I believe Maryland's 18%.
It is.
Maryland is 18%.
Yes.
What's Delaware?
It's about 10 to 12 in that range. And Southern Virginia, interestingly enough, is working their way toward 10%. They have had, apparently before my time and maybe before some of everybody else's time here, they had some very strong difficulties in that diocese, and there was a fall off in giving, etc. So they're building their way back up. And that's what I know. Of course, we could go to the Diocese of Nevada model, which is 24%.
Yeah, when I was a young priest, one of the dioceses I served, the rule was 25% across the board, and it was mandated. If you didn't do it, you couldn't vote at convention. Interesting how far we've changed. Ron, you have something to say now.
Well,
Stand up, please.
I want to make one comment. I don't have the exact number, but I looked, for this year's Treasury report, I looked at the wealth. I looked at wealth. Use the microphone. I looked at the issue of wealth of the parishes. And because of the age of our parishes and the effect of compound interest over 300 years, there is really not very much necessarily relationship between ASA, which I never heard of before, ASA, and the amount of endowment that we have. Now, it is generally, first of all, I've got to tell you, I believe that an endowment should be used to promote program, in our case, to promote ministry. If you're not doing anything with that endowment, I think you've done something very funny, very strange with the talents which the past has given to you. Because at some point, if we have declining attendance, we'll just have endowments and no, I mean, actuarially, we will all disappear. And all that will be left are the endowments. And the last guy can turn out the lights, and I guess he gets to spend the endowments. But the point, one of the points I wanted to make, which to me is an easy one, is almost all nonprofits use their endowments in a very similar way. They set a spend rate, and that spend rate could be anywhere from, let's say, 4 to 6%. And that's what they take and contribute to their budget every year against that endowment.
I was just wondering, and please forgive me for my ignorance of the job description, but is a candidate for the size of our diocese is it even totally necessary? Because it seems as though if that job was erased, then that would give us more monies, and that would put us pretty close to back in black.
I missed a couple of words. Was it the canon position you were talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. My point of view on this is that I think a canon is essential. It depends a lot on the bishop whether or not that person needs to be full-time or, say, half or two-thirds time. Some bishops can do fine with a half-time person. Other bishops really need a full-time person. Different styles, different balancing of gifts, and all that sort of thing. So I think a lot of that would depend on the bishop we elect if we choose that option. My view is that I think it is possible to do okay with a half-time or two-third time canon. That's my opinion. That doesn't mean the next bishop might agree with that. So we're going to have to be somewhat agile about that.
But then again, you know, if we look at farming this out, the other option of farming this out to some other diocese, it doesn't quite make sense because, you know, we have problems, they have problems. If we, as you said, more research would be needed in the whole area, how are we going to help their problems? Because I'll guarantee you, if they want somebody, it's to help them financially, just like we want somebody to help us financially.
Yeah, I understand that. And I do think that, you know, half-time is possible. I was looking at the financial thing again, and if you take the median full-time bishop with a part-time canon, you're still $67,000 short. And so even then, you still got a financial challenge. Yes, sir. Bill?
Speaking of $67,000, it's kind of an obvious supplemental loss, and we show it consistently and not really much thought to ask about the standing committee the other day. But would you explain what the supplemental $65,346 loss is? I know what it is, but I'm not so sure that people do. And the other thing is, I'm going to ask, do you know whether or not such a program is available in either Maryland or Delaware?
Bill, I'll take the first part of that question. And it will be, if you haven't picked up the packet already, there is a packet in the back with loads of tiny numbers on it. It shows you the budget and it explains that supplemental budget. The supplemental budget, primarily that $65,000, that, what is it, $65,000 loss, is made up of two things. The rest are washes in and out. One is the, I think about 20,000 of that, maybe a little less, is the putting the money away for a rainy day. Okay, that's our accruals for things like general convention, that sort of stuff. The rest of that is for the retired clergy premium 50%. Now, what we did, we took a giant step as a committee, the task force, and we reduced that by 20% for this budget. So it's $75,000 is what we estimate we will pay this year, and 50% for retired clergy premiums. And we went ahead and we took 20% away from that, figuring maybe we can, I know the compensation committee is looking at that, and we've had a lot of talk. Whether something happens, I don't know, but that's what we did here. As to whether that program is in any other diocese, do we know?
Delaware pays 100% of the supplemental. That's what we're talking about. Medicare supplemental. Delaware pays 100%.
Of the middle range. There are three ranges: the basic, which is free; the middle, which is slightly more; and the top, which is more again. They pay 100% of the middle if you've served a certain number of years in that diocese.
What we're paying is premium.
We're paying premium, basically half.
Half of premium.
Half of premium. So,
Medicare supplements.
yeah.
But it's the premium.
Well, it's actually the supplement through medical trust. Yeah, that's right, exactly. So it may be the same between us and Delaware.
if you compare the figures. Back here and then Kevin, yeah.
If we go the direction of wooing somebody else, however long that takes, and you're leaving in a year, what do we do in the meantime?
I'm trying to think. What's the meantime that you're referring to?
After you leave your
If
departure.
it takes all this time for us to collaborate and, before we get married, then you're leaving in a year.
Yeah.
Then what do we do from the time that you
Yeah.
leave until whoever, what do we do?
The resolution says that we would ask the standing committee to pursue another bishop provisional or similar Episcopal assistance. There are other options. I mean, like you could have another bishop come in, like they did in Pennsylvania, another diocesan bishop who would come to you for, X number of days a year and Sundays and so forth, as Sean Rowe is doing between two Pennsylvania dioceses. You could elect another provisional bishop like me. Probably wouldn't want to do that, having experienced one. No, just kidding. Lighten us up a little bit. Or you could get an assistant bishop. Somebody on the Western Shore that would love to come over and be an assistant, wouldn't have the same jurisdiction that a provisional has, but would be able to confirm and do pastoral things and that sort of business. The standing committee would have the authority of the diocese if you got an assistant bishop. So there are a lot of different models. Kevin's next, and then...
Just to shift the topic for a minute to some other work that was presented today, this idea of clustering. I'm thinking about it now, maybe there are some cost savings that could be achieved through collaboration. I know this came up at Clericus last week, and I'm just wondering if the committee's had time to give some thought. You've got geographic clustering, but it may make more sense to do clustering by size or type or interest of parish. And was there some discussion on the discernment committee about that idea? Like anything to get us to work better together, I think is a great idea. Geography may not be it.
In the committee, we didn't have much other discussion rather than the kind of working in neighboring parishes. Although we did have that discussion in Clericus about there are parishes with other affinities that we might be and it doesn't mean that it's an either-or kind of thing. There might be some places where neighboring parishes make sense to be working together, maybe on some outreach effort together in the local town or local county. But for other, maybe like larger parishes, may want to get to larger and smaller, might want to go to smaller, things of that sort too. I don't think this cluster keeps you from doing these other affinity relationships. But we were throwing out that the geographical nearness might make it easier to be collaborating with a lot of people rather than having to travel longer distances. So I think we could be open to also other types of arrangements as well. This is all grassroots, so if it's working, fine. If it's not, if there's another way of working, I think we need it. And it's collaboration. I think the Department of Missions should be encouraging that kind of thing. So.
Thank you. Let's see. Tom had something, and then Ron.
I just wanted to clarify that one point, that if another bishop provisional were called, that person could be called for a period of 5 years. You have the benefit of an experienced bishop as opposed to a new bishop, and they could manage through a transition process to determine where this finally settles out.
Yeah. I think it's possible. There is a problem with the pension fund and some periods that they allow and don't allow for someone on pension to do that. But it's possible that something might change in that regard. There's discussion going on. So, yeah, you're right. It could be a longer term provisional, perhaps.
Can I have a minute? When I was first treasurer, there was a committee that had been set up to evaluate changes in the apportionment percentage. After a couple of years, or after a year, I said, you know, this is a zero-sum game. If somebody's apportionment is going to go down, somebody else's is going to go up. And therefore, I wouldn't want anyone to leave and believe that there's any support for, you know, going to some kind of, what do they call it, regressive type of system. I mean, you know, the IRS has gotten us all to live with progressive systems, and we should look upon progressive rates as a way for the richer parishes to do a little beyond parish giving for the poorer parishes. But I don't think any of us that I know of in the office of the diocese believe that we can increase the basic rate that the smaller parishes are paying. I don't want anybody to walk away here believing that I believe that, or I think anybody believes that, because we understand the situation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, y'all ask good questions. Yes, and then I think there was one over here. Yes, yes. You actually.
I'm Carol Schroeder from St. Paul's, Kent, and I'm going to ask a very simple question. I would like a summary. This has been a whole lot of information. I would like a summary, a quick summary, of exactly what we have to vote on June 6th. And I'm assuming it's the discernment resolution.
No, I'll come back. I'll explain that. It's not those. No.
Okay.
But
Well, yeah. Okay. So I just need to know what.
I'll tell you what it is. Yeah.
Okay.
A lot has gone through the channels here for the past hour and 40 minutes. So you're a perfectly legitimate question. I actually plan to do that at the end anyway.
Okay.
So yes, ma'am.
Connie Price, St. Clements. I'm a little new at this, but doesn't it really still come back, the budget come back to the parishes who are not fulfilling their proportionment? Should we go to South Virginia or Delaware, what's to say they're not going to come and say, well, you're not paying your proportionment, or you're not, we'll just take your church. You're still going to have those same problems, whether we stay ourselves or go with someone else. Is that not kind of?
Yeah, it'd be, in uniting with another diocese, you would be bringing two groups together and creating more resources. So the same issues would be there, and are probably already there in the other diocese.
Right, they already are.
But you'd have a bigger pool, and therefore it wouldn't be quite as critical. You know, there's something wonderful about a smaller diocese. I've come to love this diocese. The problem is sustainability in the 21st century. For instance, the diocesan income has been flat for basically 7 years. And you just can't make a sustainable diocese if you're going to have flat income for 7 years, because utilities go up, and various things go up, and circumstances change. So there's got to be some increase of income to make it work. I think Susan's next, and then over here. Yeah.
Howard, you mentioned when you spoke about there would be some things that if we considered merging with another diocese, about things that we might have to give up and other things we would not give up. Are those things, I'm thinking, one of the first ones is Camp Wright, for instance, and then the investments, the assets, those other assets held by the diocese, like $5 million, I think, that we have in investment. Are those the things that you consider, are you talking about, and are there other things that you're talking about too that we may not know about?
I think that the things that would be talked about in negotiations between the different dioceses could run the gamut. But I've never done this before. You know that famous Karate Kid movie, Don't Know First Time? Well, that's what we would be doing. We don't know first time. It would be the subject of long discussions at bishop levels, standing committee levels, and perhaps other levels that would result in the coming together of people of like mind to go forward together. Exactly how that would work, I really can't say. I don't know. And I don't believe there's anybody, except maybe you can say something to that. I don't believe there's anybody in this room who knows exactly how that would happen, or what what things would be discussed about giving up or not giving up. But I think the important thing is we need to think about what it is that's important for us that we wouldn't give up in that situation. And maybe some of the things that you talked about might be part of that. But I can't name anything else at the moment. It's too early in my own thinking about it and in our talk about it to really say anything. I'm not trying to avoid your question. I just don't know anything more about it at this point.
Well, I guess my concern is like with the Diocese of Maryland, that they, as I've been told, they already have a Camp Conference Center.
They do.
And then.
So does Virginia.
So does Delaware.
So does Delaware.
So, coming from other dioceses that had to sell camps and conference centers for various reasons, I guess my concern is I would hate to see us merge with a diocese and then sell those assets, and that diocese, the whole diocese of Maryland, for instance, reap benefits.
I hear you loud and clear. Yeah.
I just want to say one thing and then two more questions. We better wind up. I just happened to talk to Dee Zeller last night at the 85th anniversary birthday party of Camp Wright, which is a neat occasion, by the way. A little hot after the rain, but it was lovely. And I just came up, and she said, well, I think in the case of Maryland, just for what it's worth, I think that their conference center, which is over in the west, inland, would in the mountains would be a great complement to Camp Wright, which is on the shore. And the two would probably make a nice balance for a larger diocese to share two different camps, you know, two different experiences. So that's an example of how you wouldn't lose something, you'd gain something else. The only thing I'd say is from my experience in Alabama, where Alabama divided into two dioceses, there was a complicated and fairly simple process of looking at different assets so that the new diocese received a certain portion of the assets of the old diocese. In the case of a unification, I think there'd be some preservation of the endowments of the existing churches of this diocese. You wouldn't all get subsumed into the Western Shore because it's been given for the churches here. It'd have to be kept for these churches. So I don't think you'd lose your endowments, in other words. That's what I'm saying. That's not at risk. I don't think. But again, first time, as Howard wisely says, there was a back here, yeah, against the wall.
I think we're all here to know that not all churches, well, all churches aren't given a portion of half of each. I don't think we should feel ill about that. But I think we should also, the church can give more than a portion. That's also a possibility. And in Christ I do for a while, we try to do a little bit more for a portion. And I think we all need to go back and have a talk about money. We do. The problem comes down to there's not enough money to pay all the bills. If we can come up with a little bit more money, a lot of these problems will go away. The question that you've been asking, I'm not sure you would take more.
Howard, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, you're right. We would take more. Correct. Thank you for that comment.
Kathleen, I think last question here, and we need to start winding up.
I think all of us would agree that a marriage of convenience is usually not what we want. But using the dating and marriage analogy, when two people come together or two families come together, there are things to be gained and things to be negotiated. And it kind of concerns me that we're only looking at the scary parts instead of the richness that another diocese might bring. And I think that most of us here have probably negotiated a relationship of marriage, and it has brought great benefit, even though we may have given up something in the process. And so I think we need to keep that in mind, that yes, there will be giving up, but I think if we were to do that, it would be for what we would gain, not just, oh, well, we'll gain some money, but rather that we would gain some benefits. The same thing to me is true with Cluster Ministries. What could we, when our churches have gotten smaller, what could we do that would be of benefit to both groups and that would enrich the communities that we're ministering?
Thank you very much. Those are all great questions. Howard, do you want to say anything before we start winding up?
Only a last thank you for Mark and his parish for having us here. Thank you for all of you coming from, some of you great distance, some of them shorter. I am I'm proud to be among committed people. Thank you.
Okay, let me answer the lady from St. Paul's, Kent's question. There's a sheet in your packet, I think, that looks like this. It's not there. It was emailed to you. I wasn't sure earlier whether it was here or not. It has been emailed to you. Well, I mean, not last week, but this was some time back. When I sent you the letter announcing the special convention, I included the resolutions passed in February, and I included the 5 resolutions to be proposed in June. You've got it. And if you don't have it, your rector has it. Remember, it came in a letter like this. That's the letter. This is the attachment. I see some of you waving it around. You definitely need to have this, so go back to your file or to your parish office and get a copy. Kevin, are you?
Henry, I believe it's on the website.
It's probably on the website. Yeah, probably is. Thank you. It's resolution A, B, C, D, and E, which were composed and worked on by me and the standing committee. And these are the 5 resolutions that will be on the floor of the special convention. There won't be any further resolutions. These may be amended, they may be substituted, they may be tabled, they may be rejected, they may be passed, adopted. All those possibilities. As far as I know, we will take them in order. The first is about the discernment committee's report. There may be some things you want to change or add to that report. So amendments will be in order. Resolution B is about going ahead and electing the 11th Bishop of Easton with some provisions for that election. C has to do with looking at a part-time bishop and some provisions that relate to that. D has to do with unification with a neighboring contiguous diocese. And E has to do with a more thorough study of non-traditional or missionary models of the episcopate and a further report for the convention of 2016. Those are the 5 resolutions. We can do whatever we will with them as a corporate body in doing what we like to call perfecting them in accordance with the discerning will of this diocese corporately. And so what I'd like you to do between now and June 6th, in addition to praying about all of this, is to talk to each other about them. Talk to your parish communities about them. Study them, debate them among yourselves, and think about what you want to do when you come together on June the 6th, so that we're prepared. The more prepared we are, the more we've thought it through, the better will be the result. My job will be to gather the convention. We'll have morning prayer. and prayers for our process, and then we will begin debating these resolutions according to the rules of Robert's parliamentary procedure. We'll have lunch about 11:45 or whenever we're hungry enough. Then we'll come back together and finish, I believe, by 3 o'clock. We might be done by lunchtime. Who knows what will happen? But we're going to allow at least till 3 o'clock because I think we'll need that perhaps. And hopefully we will make a decision one way or the other. Jane, yes?
Jane Morgan, Lieutenant Cranston, and a General Convention Deputy. Would you please fill us in on the goodbye or the send-off at convention?
As part of that June 6th special meeting, we will have a thank you for the Discernment Committee, whose work will then be completed. We will salute them in an appropriate way. At the end, we will commission the deputation for General Convention. The deputies will be there, and we'll ask them to come forward and pray over them and ask the Holy Spirit to give them good sense and wisdom as they represent us and the whole church at the General Convention. Eddie Vance is there nodding. Good sense and wisdom, yes.